One of the statements that folks often come across in the context of Black Lives Matter is the statement, all lives matter, not just Black lives. Often folks will engage in conversations that end up being unproductive. An anti-racist conversation is one that aims to shift the needle or shift the person from a status quo perspective, which might reinforce racism, whether that's apathetic or so-called non-racist. An anti-racist conversation, on the other hand, aims to create the fertile ground for the next conversation. So when folks hear the statement, all lives matter, not just Black lives, how can we use the framework of Dr. David Kampt, the RACE framework, to engage in this conversation? The first step is to reflect. What are your triggers? How can you engage in this conversation in a productive way? What might you say that might trigger the other person? So for example, for me, when I hear the statement, I hear a denial of Black pain, I hear a denial of the Black experience, and I also feel a sense of disconnection from the reality of racism in the United States and around the world. Those experiences trigger me, and so I enter a conversation having to really acknowledge that that context is something that creates an emotional reaction in me. I need to be prepared for that reaction so that I can enter the conversation, and instead of saying statements, I need to ask questions, and that's the second stage. What questions can I ask this person to shift them from beliefs to experiences? So in a conversation, I said to somebody, what does Black lives mean to you? And the person shared an experience of fairness. They said that if they talk about Black lives, they are excluding all other groups. And so inclusion and exclusion was something that was really important to this person. This person was a teacher, and so including folks was really important to them. The theme of inclusion is something that I can then connect to that person with by telling a story of connection. Notice that I'm not saying a statement. I've asked them to tell me about their lived experience, and now I'm finding a story that will connect with that experience. So I shared a story of how being South African, in South Africa, in a racist society, there are always moments of inclusion and exclusion. Growing up in a mixed race family, I often was included while my sister was excluded. There were moments being in the United States as an immigrant to the United States that I have been excluded as a result of my ethnic background. And so sharing that story, sharing a few stories with this person about my experience of being included and excluded, connected to this person. But I can't just connect with them. I have to then expand their perspective, reflect, ask, connect, and then expand. And my goal in the expansion is not go all out, okay? My goal is to really think about another story that can then expand this person's perspective. So the second story that I told this person was that I had, growing up and having a Black sister, I had always advocated to say all lives matter. But as I began to understand that I was being treated differently because of my white skin and she was being treated differently because of her Black skin, that in fact saying all lives matter was a way of excluding her. So my goal was to include her, but actually by not acknowledging her experience as a Black person, I was excluding her. And so I recognized that by saying all lives matter, inherently all our lives matter, inherently. But the reality is that in a society in which race and racism operates, if we say things like all lives matter, what we are actually doing is diminishing the experiences of Black folks. And we are not necessarily taking the steps necessary to advocate, ally, accomplice with Black folks by saying Black lives matter, by putting that at the forefront of our experiences. And so I couldn't begin that conversation with that person with my expansion. I had to create the fertile ground for that. And Dr. David Kamp's framework of the RACE framework allows us to do that.